Welcome everybody to our next episode. Today we are going to be covering the Oscar-winning film Whiplash, which is a tremendously powerful and scary film about a student in a music conservatory, as played by Miles Teller, who the character's name in the movie is Andrew, but we'll probably call him Miles 100 times. So we'll just get that out of the way, that Miles and Andrew are now going to be interchangeable terms. But this film is a really powerful look at ambition and where the line between narcissistic abuse versus ego deconstruction is. And we have with us today a guest who was once my music teacher and is also a holder of a master's degree. And I'll let her introduce herself and go through her all accolades, but I wanted to welcome in Tessa Hoffman as our guest today.
Hi everyone. My name is Tessa Marie Hoffman. I'm a queer performer local to Chicago, Illinois. I've been teaching music privately for around 10 years now. And I've been studying voice specifically for just over 20. And I'm really excited to be on the podcast. I think this is a very intense and unfortunately realistic depiction of entertainment and music as an art in higher education.
Well, that's a bummer. Agreed.
It is. It's a huge bummer.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like both of those things at the same time. It's both so true and so tragic.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm really grateful to have you on with us, and that, Ben, you thought to introduce Tessa to this episode, as that's a great wealth of knowledge there. Because I was saying before we were recording that, and I don't care if he listens or anyone that knew me in high school listens and knows who I'm talking about, I won't name him, but I had a high school choir director who acted like this. Not to this level, but would throw things, threw a music stand against the wall once, screamed at me to shut up in class once. He had his favorites. I was not one of them. Surprise, surprise, because I did not buy what he was selling. One time he tried to leave our class in a huff because he was mad at us. And he was trying to intimidate us by basically cold shouldering us and leaving the room so we could sit in silence. And he mildly tripped while he walked out. And everyone held their breath together because we were like, if any one of us laughs, he is going to rip us to absolute fucking shreds, and we will not live to see tomorrow. But I remember we all wanted to laugh because it was so, even at the time, we were like, you're a baby. You're acting like a baby. Well, I felt that way because I wasn't enmeshed with him at all. I was like, you're acting like a baby. This is baby behavior. And you're going to make me feel bad because I can't sing Tiger, Tiger Burning Brightly for our concert this weekend for my parents. Who gives a shit? I was like, the stakes couldn't be lower, bro. And you're going to try to intimidate me. He was also 5 foot, whatever, not to be a height hater, but he was just a tiny little man and an absolute maniac. And for what? You know what I mean? Yeah. And then later in life, he would come into the restaurant I worked in, and he used to tip me a lot. And I was always wondering if this was him trying to I don't know, reparations for being an absolute maniac and screaming in my face on more than one occasion.
Don't give him that much credit.
Yeah. I mean, I think he was just probably his own version of narcissism, where he liked throwing around his money and also being an absolute terror. Probably 2 high school students in Southern Ohio. What are we doing?
Oh.
Well, remember, Brittany, he has earned the position of high school choir director.
Yeah. And
in such, he has become the gateway to your dreams. And you must learn that perfection is the only way forward in a subjective art.
It's fucking nonsense.
That is the entire point, Hannah. The episode is over. Hannah nailed it. It's nonsense. We're done.
I think what's funny is I think all of us did the arts in high school and did them a lot. I was in drama and choir and show choir. Hannah, you did a lot of musical stuff too, right?
I did plays and musicals, and I was in the band and I was in the choir, and we had a bonkers band leader I think I started when I was a freshman. He was a real maniac.
Yeah, I also.
And he was a band teacher in Vassar. Do you know where Vassar is? No, because nobody fucking knows where Vassar is. Who gives a flying fuck? It's not like we were going to be in a competition anywhere ever in the history of the universe. It's too small. Nobody cares.
And even if you made it to the competition, it's a high school competition and no one cares.
Yeah.
Anyway,
it's amazing. I also was in band forever and continue to be in bands now, though not the same kind. As it turns out, the market for trumpet playing is not, in fact, that vast and equitable as they would make it seem in fifth grade. But I think the things that I find myself very lucky in is I've never had a music teacher that was like this. I know they exist.
I had a voice teacher. I was a little kid. I was like 11 years old, and she hated sopranos, and I was a soprano, and she would just like yell in my face while I was singing about how being loud didn't mean that I was good.
Oh my God.
She would make me cry. And eventually I told my mom that I didn't want to go anymore. She also made me buy tenor books.
What?
Yeah, I had all these tenor books that she wanted me to buy. She was bonkers. Yeah. And then I found out from another voice teacher. That she hated sopranos.
I feel like we had to get all of this like our own like collective trauma around music teachers. Because I also had my piano teacher, who was also my church choir director, shamed us all that we didn't love God enough because we weren't trying hard enough in there. I mean, I think what boils it all down to is
It took 5 minutes. We killed Tessa. Sorry, Brittany.
Well, and also, I mean, I think this will lead into the topic at hand, which is kind of, I know, Tessa, you want to talk about, we're going to talk about abuse within education, specifically like the instructor-student dynamic, abuse within the entertainment, specifically, that kind of thing. I think like that instructor, that one was my church and piano instructor. I think she like wanted to take me under her wing, and I used to do a lot of singing, specifically in church. Sometimes I would do like up to 3 masses. I was Catholic a weekend, which when my mom gets on me now about going to church, I'm like, I did my quota early. Like I stockpiled in high school, and now I don't have to go because I did all the church I ever have to do. And I think what is a shame about all this, and I'm sure this will come up as we talk about it, is I almost like a vow when I left high school said, I will never do anything musical ever again. I shall not sing. I won't play the piano. I will not dance. Like I wrote off creative endeavors in that way, even though I think I was decently talented and all that stuff, because I had such multiple shitty relationships with multiple adults as a kid. And even that young, I was like, I am a kid and you are an adult. And you guys are horrible and immature and dysregulated. I was like, I don't want to be around adults who act like this ever again. And I never did it. I never did anything to the point that it feels like another life that I did music and dancing and choir and piano playing. And like, it's like, this is very Aries of me, very fire sign of me. I was like, I shall not perform again. And I did not. And it's going on 20 years.
No, that's actually a very devastatingly common story, especially going into and out of high school. It's one of my biggest fears as a teacher. And when I first started my very, very first little voice student in undergrad, I was crying a little bit one day. Like, what if I ruin them? Like, what if I'm the reason they never want to pursue this again? Like, I feel nuts about it. And obviously, as time goes on, you get less anxious and you see the wonderful progression they're making and you get to steal those little good feelings. But that is a nightmare scenario. If I ever heard someone tell me I was the reason they stopped, I would be like, okay, you're allowed to kill me. You're legally allowed to unalive me. Go for it.
I'm not your vampire. Just drive a stake. Get a big hammer. Just wait for me to sleep, please. But, It's your right. I think that is a fear, Tessa, honestly, that I think all of us therapists feel equally is like, it is our goal to never be the therapist that makes someone not come back to therapy.
Yeah.
I think that's what we talk a lot about on the podcast in general, but also I think it's just something that I work with I have a couple clients right now who are going to school to be therapists. And that's the first thing they say. What if I like screw them up, or like, what if I say like the wrong thing in the wrong moment? And that's what they're the most afraid of when they start.
Yeah. But I think if you're asking that question, Tessa, if you're thinking about that, if you're thinking about it at all, and the fact that the people you talk to, Hannah, are thinking about it all, means that you're probably not going to do it.
Yeah.
Because I will say this to segue sharply into the movie itself. I don't think Fletcher thinks about that at all. I don't think he gives a shit about whether he is putting someone off. I mean, he kind of says that, right? Towards, I think, the end of the movie or the last half, where he's like, if you can't handle it, that's a you problem. Because you couldn't take the heat, so you had to get out of the kitchen. And it's never going to be me. I'm never going to be the reason why someone does not succeed. Like, it's not my fault or my problem. It's everyone else's problem.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's very much the case, that he would never consider that. He would lean into the brutality of the business, which exists.
Mm-hmm.
It's very real. He is not wrong on that, depending particularly on what aspect of the business you want to get into. It's brutal.
Mm-hmm.
It's vicious, and people will replace you. But looking at whether or not he would ever in a million years look at his behavior and ask that question, I think the answer is resounding no.
Yeah,
definitely no.
The only reason he cried when he found out that student was gone is because then he can't look at his own life and feel validated that his teaching methods, as we'll put in air quotes for those of you who can't see my fingers doing that, air quotes, that everything he's done is valid because somebody made it to first chair at Lincoln Center with Wynton Marsalis, which is an amazing accomplishment. But because your student did that shouldn't be the source of your validation in the world.
Mm-hmm.
You get to share that win, but that shouldn't be your validation.
Because I think kind of the question of the movie, if you will, and what we're kind of the question of our first topic is this appropriate behavior? Like, is this, and what we're seeing in Fletcher, is that what's to be expected and therefore correct in terms of how you, within a high pressure setting, like how you prepare someone within this specific industry, but in industries that are more like are similarly high pressure. And I think, I guess I can speak for myself, but I think I'm speaking for all of us when we say no. Like, this character, who is only the devil emoji in my phone notes because I could not think of what his name was. So then I just kept using the devil emoji. So if you see my notes, there are so many notes, more than maybe I've taken for any movie we've watched, because every time I got mad, I wrote it down. And just devil emojis throughout. Maybe I'll put it on Instagram. But I think you're hitting upon something that I guess I just wanted to mark, which is he is someone that is seeing everything through the realm of himself. And him getting choked up about Sean Casey, that character, I think you're exactly right, which is that he can it's no longer a success story because he died. And also he bullshits about the reason why he died, which makes it an extra not quote unquote success story, because it's someone who, you could think of it like this way, chose to leave the earth, right? Or quit on his life is probably how we would think. Like, took like the pussy way out would probably be how Fletcher would call it.
If that mildly, right?
Yeah. Oh, I'm very, Oh, yeah. He definitely probably used other words, slurs, if you will. Me saying pussy is me being very PC in comparison to him.
In comparison to Fletcher. Yeah. I mean, I don't know that he knew that it was, I think the family concealed it until the hearing, but I think it's still, those tears he showed are definitely crocodile tears about him. Not about Sean Casey's life. And looking at the role of a teacher, is this appropriate in education? I think only one of us here on the pod today is trained in pedagogy and what that means. So maybe we should, turn to Tessa here. And Tessa, what do you think about this role of this teacher here?
So I'm not gonna lie, this is my second time watching the film. The last time I watched it was several years ago, and I watched it blind. I had like physical, visceral reactions to watching it, especially in any of the rehearsal scenes, because I have experienced things like that firsthand. Getting called out and asking and being asked to like play that measure. What does this mean? What does this mean? And I'm having a trippy moment like, wait a minute, sometimes when I'm teaching, I do that too. Am I Terrence Fletcher? Am I approaching it in that way? Like, am I about to be an Oscar winner? Like, what's going on here? But I think at the end of the day, it's the idea that in our high school band choir experiences that we all have, and any type of ensemble, you're working with a conductor, there's that ultimate, like, I'm the god of this group because I have the vision. And if you're not playing in the exact way I want, I see it as kind of insulting. I see it as disrespect. When sometimes music is just really hard. And especially working with kids, like I know this is set in a music conservatory, but Miles/Andrew is 18, right? So
he's first year. So he's at best 19.
Yeah.
I think they said that he was 19 at some point anyway.
He's fresh. He has no social skills. We see, I think, from the very beginning of the film. And he's an extremely impressionable person being introduced to like the music god of their times. So obviously, I'm coming from a vocal standpoint, and our abuse is different in terms of we're very image focused. So not only do you have to sound good, you have to look good. You have to be a certain size, a certain weight. You can't be taller than this type of person. Your voice has to sound very specific. A lot of sexual harassment in the industry, a lot of gross stuff like that. But the environment that was created in any of these scenes is so unconducive to creating music that I was having like little panics as I was watching it.
Well, because maybe you can answer this question, but in something like what I understand to be a pretty loose form jazz is being this pedantic, where does that leave room for like creativity, for people to feel empowered to be creative? Like, you're right, it's going back to like the idea of like narcissism, you know, or like this is narcissistic abuse, is like what you were saying, where it's going through the vision of the god in the room, which in this movie is Fletcher, of like, it has to be how I want it to be and how I envision it being. And you have to meet me in my world. And it's not fostering any love of the game, if you will, like any like independence or creativity, which I guess I can understand from the perspective of if you want to work with like a big deal company, a big deal like conductor, that kind of thing, like you will go through a version of this perhaps, and you will encounter people like him. How do people grow if not like from like a creative or like an openness around creativity, if that makes sense?
That is such a great question. And I think in this universe, they don't even imagine another world outside of Terrence Fletcher's vision. And one of the most insane things that I noticed and that they show you from the beginning is that when Miles and J.K. Simmons first meet and he's in the practice rooms, right? He has this moment where he's like, well, keep playing, you know, doing that little cat and mouse playing with his food situation. And we watch Miles kind of get lost to the music and look away. And in that time he looks away, J.K. Simmons disappears, right? Another like little needle. And then I noticed in the rehearsals, nobody is looking at J.K. Simmons. The musicians aren't while he's conducting. And that, as a musician, is wrong. You obviously you have your music in front of you. If you're not memorized, you're reading your lead sheets, but you are also locked in with your conductor at all times. So I'm wondering if that idea was meant to paint this like fear of this conductor and kind of
really hammering the idea that his vision is the only way, and all of the other musicians in that big studio band are already like broken down to the point where they know how to play it.
Yeah, I think they've earned that space from him, but only so much. Because watching that cat and mouse game is terrifying. You see in this style of education, right, it's a weird dynamic to find that people can't be themselves in, you're right, Brittany, jazz is an inherent art about improvisation. But then in conservatory education, where like both my uncle and cousin went for music, and I've had several clients go to, and seen the pressure secondhand as not being the person under it, but you're required to play these parts to perfection that someone improvised initially. And because they recorded it and it got played over and over, now it's a standard. Now everybody expects it to sound a certain way that was created through the magic of improvisation. Now you have to replicate it, and you have to do it perfectly, and you have to do it the way the judges remember it and the way the conductor demands it. And the room to be free and creative exists in jazz clubs, but not in jazz competitions, if that makes sense. Which is a absolutely mind-flaying standard to uphold, because it's impossible.
It's a bummer. I mean, I'm probably going to use that word a lot in this episode. It's a bummer. Even hearing you really say that, it bums me out. It bums me out because I think it establishes a dynamic which gets taken advantage of in this situation, where you have to reach a level of perfection that is maybe impossible, or a level of matching that's impossible. And then also it goes diametrically against what I would consider to be like the point or the purpose of art and music, right? Is to like slaughter it down to an eighth note. You know what I mean? To like break it down that much. And it allows someone like Fletcher to just take advantage of that. I mean, I think for me, he just is someone who is taking advantage of the position of power he's in. And what you were saying, you both were kind of mentioning, Ben and Tessa, like the looking down part. I wrote that down in that he is someone who trades in humiliation.
Oh, yeah.
He is someone who I would think gets off on humiliation, you know? And like I said, I want to be careful. I've talked about on this podcast before. I don't believe there's any such thing as like bad people. Also, it's a fictional character, but I know people like him exist. And like I've said at the top, I've encountered them. So I can acknowledge that who knows what he's gone through to earn his place where he's at. And I'm sure he's gone through similar situations, which is kind of like the toxic cycle of this kind of abuse too, is this sort of like you earn your stripes. So then you pass it down because you got through the rite of passage that is being abused by a higher up, someone who holds the kings to the kingdom, if you will. And that level of humiliation that you witness in this movie is what, for me, takes it out of, like you were saying, Ben, I think earlier, maybe this before we started recording, of like training someone to deal with like high pressure, kind of like breaking them down to build them up. Where I think this goes past that and into abuse, I think humiliation is a big hallmark of that. The humiliation we see in this movie, the way that he is, there's no winning. Like we see that right from the jump, you know, like you said, that cat and mouse game, Tessa, that he plays in the very beginning. It's to create a scenario and a dynamic that everyone understands where you cannot win, because Fletcher cannot allow anyone to win, which to me is like a sign of also being like a narcissistic abuser. Is there's no scenario in which you win, because I always have to win. And if you are winning, I will change the rules. So if you do well, I will bring in Connolly, the other drummer, to put you in your fucking place. And I will create a atmosphere so hostile that when I enter the room, no one even can look at me. Everyone is looking down as if they're worried that if they make a breath that's too loud, they're going to get like ripped to shreds. Like they're terrified of him. And it is so upsetting to witness.
Well, I mean, you're hearing Tessa tell us that she's like having visceral reactions.
Yeah.
Right. Like what's the grown up word in our jargon, right? Is flashbacks for that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, like having a trauma reaction.
I gotta say, I'm surprised more people weren't barfing during the movie because, like, when he's running to the practice room late, when he falls down the stairs, when he's like, play this measure over 12,000 times, I would have been barfing my guts out. I would have been crying and I would have left.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Absolutely.
when we were talking about like music stuff in the beginning and Brittany and Hannah were describing their experiences, Tessa, I was going to offer you a bucket because that's something within here. And I agree. I think people probably did walk out of this movie. I think people probably looked at this movie as one of the ones where you go like, nope, nope, never again. Don't care. Nope. Done. Forever. This is too close. It's too real. And it is scary. Like people like this do exist that sit in that narcissistic pocket where I think they made a point, Brittany, to show, at least the way I saw it, and I don't know if anybody else did, but I think they made it clear to show like everybody holding their breath pretty much.
Yeah. Yeah. I think they did shots of the group just for that. Just for us to see how this isn't a Andrew thing. This is everybody is just as terrified as the next person. And having that kind of environment is not conducive to anything. Doesn't matter what you're trying to do. You know, and when we think about abuse within education, this is a good example of that. And I see the abuse that I see in education is with PhD students. I see PhD students who get an advisor who they vibed with initially, and then all of a sudden the advisor decides that they have to put them through the hell that they personally went through. And then you have somebody who's miserable. I have friends that stopped being in their PhD programs because of how horrible the advisor was or how horrible a professor was, and because they can ruin your dissertation. Yeah. They can ruin your ability to complete your dissertation. Like they have all of the power and the student has none.
Now that I have had is professors like that.
Yeah.
I am sure you get that being with your office in Evanston, getting so many of students from prestigious Northwestern University.
That's where they all come from Northwestern, and they're all PhD students. It's because of horrible shit that goes on at Northwestern that nobody fucking talks about.
So I'm going to put you on the spot, Ben. We've used the term narcissistic abuse a few times, and that's also a term I'm noticing become more in the pop culture zeitgeist. So could you succinctly, if possible, describe what we mean when we say narcissistic abuse, like versus just saying he's abusive?
Yeah. So what I see in this character that makes it cross the line from just someone being emotionally abusive to narcissistic abuse is when someone is emotionally abusive, it is generally speaking, obviously everything has a case by case basis, and please don't take this as an explanation of someone you know, but broad strokes, right? Is that oftentimes emotional abuse is born out of a survival reaction that is going haywire at the moment. Someone is having an inability to manage their own regulation chronically and is now reaching the point that they are hurting other people with their reactivity and are losing sight of being able to regulate themselves enough to take control. That is not a free pass. That is not an it's okay that that's happening. But the difference between someone being chronically dysregulated and unable to recognize that when they are in that state, they are hurting people, and people who are demonstrating it is my way of validating myself through my worldview that is unrelenting. I will not adjust it. Everyone will adjust to me. Everyone will validate me. I am in control now. Is where it crosses the line into that narcissistic abuse. No other viewpoint is valid. No other person gets to win. No other person gets to wear the crown. In most emotionally abusive relationships, there's a cycle of abuse. Okay. People get overactivated. They get into a fight. They may say hurtful things, and then they break down, realizing we go through a honeymoon period and often try to make up for it, try to own what they did. But depending on where they are in their healing journey, they may or may not be able to recover from the wounds that caused them to be hurtful. And then we start the cycle all over again, where they go from have an explosive incident that is hurtful to kind of a quiet period to a let's make up and make everything better, to a honeymoon period where everything's kind of cool again, to a tension building, to another explosive incident. And sometimes those may be few and far between. Sometimes those may be frequent. But with a narcissistic abuse situation, it will be relentless. It will be constant. There will be no deviation from that. There will be no changing of the roles. There will be no acknowledgement that there ever was a moment where it was out of step. And we see that with him. It's never I was out of line and I am sorry I hurt you with what I said. It's you couldn't handle it. And if you can't handle it, it's on you because I am the God here and I'm right. I think the difference is that there is no cycle, not as much. And if there is a cycle, it's with a narcissist. It's only for their gain. They will only relent so much for their gain. And we have seen that demonstrated ad nauseum for the past 7 years, ever since a certain dickhead rode a golden elevator down and declared they were running for some office or other. I can't remember which. And we got to see it every day since, where that person just can't be wrong. They can't have made a mistake. It's everybody else. Somebody else is wrong and they're just right. And their way is always right. And they have the best words. And it's not a sore spot at all for me that someone left us a review saying they thought we were supporters of this person, and totally not gonna go on that tangent today.
Well,
oh wait, I did. Damn.
Well, for anyone who sees that review, we can further clarify. I know we did an Instagram when it first happened. We're not in charge of the specific ads that show up, so we just had we didn't mark that you couldn't put political ads on our podcast, and so
at that point in time.
Yeah, and so like any politics would be put on our episodes, and so we weren't aware that the whole spectrum of politics was being advertised on our program until we were made aware via a review, and we promptly corrected that.
The only other thing I was going to say, and maybe this is common with abuse as well, but I think something else that a narcissistic person does is really keeps you confused. And we can see from the moment he meets him, he is confused. You can tell by he's very impressionable young man. You can see it all over his face. You can see everything all over his face when it happens.
Yeah.
And that to keep someone in confusion is to keep them in a state of stress.
Yes.
Yeah.
There's no recovery period, right? Like Hannah does a lot of couples and marriage therapy. And like I see people in distress all the time doing what I do, but Hannah does marriage therapy. Like Hannah Hoffman, there are people, he didn't, or she didn't mean it, or like they come back around. Things are okay again for a while.
Yeah. I mean, I screen out a lot of abuse because you can't do couples therapy if there's an abuser, because you have to be equal with both parties. You can't be equal when one person is abusing the other. So that's a part of my assessment, which I know I always talk about, so I'm not going to go into it anymore. But that is a part of it, is because I can't be equal with someone who's abusing the other person. And I have had to turn a couple away for those exact reasons.
So keeping someone confused would then make it so that you are not on an equal footing, because only one person, the narcissistic abuser, knows the truth of what's really happening, and then the other person wouldn't. And we see that in this film throughout, as you all are pointing out astutely, but no more clearly ever than in that climactic ending performance where he dupes Andrew into thinking he's going to be playing pieces he already knows, and then puts him on stage in front of an audience with music he does not, to embarrass him before telling him, I know it was you.
I will say, this is something I was watching it with some theater friends, and I know I can't speak to like this is the climax. Obviously, it was all written for a reason. It was so well done. But when he starts improvising on the switched song that he'd never played before, I'm sitting here like, you gotta have better improv skills than that, dude. Like, you must really be going through something right now, because right now this is like, oh, Andrew. But that was definitely a barf moment for me. I would have been like, okay, I'll see myself out. I'm not even going to try.
Oh, that's the vocalist in you, right? Like, from being a vocalist, like, if you screw up, there's no hiding it.
Nope.
The drummer can screw up. Man, the vocalist, though, we can't screw up. If you get on stage and say the wrong word, everybody knows.
I think something important, like we were talking about, to just pinpoint, is that Fletcher does present as someone who is what I would consider pathologically narcissistic. We don't see anything about his life other than because we're seeing this through Andrew's worldview. So we're only seeing Fletcher when Andrew's around. So we're not seeing any private moments really, besides him talking to the guy and his kid in that one. But that's Andrew's observation of him. And so being narcissistic, it's talked about a lot. So I just want to clarify, like, when we use it as an adjective, like, that person's so narcissistic, we usually think of someone very ego driven, right? Confident, cocky, arrogant, like some things that have more of a positive spin to it. When you are pathologically narcissistic, when we talk about it from a clinical standpoint, I think what people don't really understand is that you are driven by your ego, but it's not from a positive place. It's not that you think like your shit doesn't stink, like you're so like empowered and confident and like going through the world like la-di-da. When you have pathological levels of narcissism, you are actually very unconfident on the inside. Your sense of self is coming from the outside in. And so you have to constantly be reassured of who you are, how great you are, your ego, all that stuff, right? And that's kind of the way that you put it, Ben, like, that doesn't just come and go. That's kind of like a constant situation for someone who struggles with that. And because of that, their presentation is more constant, like you're saying, like the way they treat people in their life is a constant. It's not a reaction to a stressor, which is more of like the emotional abuse, right? Like, I'm having a hard day, I'm going to go home and take it out on my wife. This is more like I constantly feel like I have to be re-upping my internal self. And I have to be doing that through other people. So I would even say, like, when Sean Casey dies and he plays that CD, to me, that felt like a telltale sign of someone who is struggling with like pathological narcissism, where he can only contextualize Sean through how he measures his greatness as a musician. He doesn't say anything about Sean as a person, as a loved one, his personality. It was just, what a shame that this great talent doesn't exist anymore. And that to him was heartbreaking, because that's the only way he could feel it, was through his worldview.
Well, and to add to that is not just in his worldview. He couldn't tell the story of Sean Casey without explaining his own
inserting
greatness.
Himself. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's okay to tell the story of a great student who did something great, but if you have to be the one who discovered him, you were the one. He barely made it here. He had so much going on, but I saw the greatness in him. I cultivated it. It all tied back to how he created that, which helps keep the other students under his thumb and dealing with his abuse, because in whatever fantasy he's creating, it can be worth it for them. And they're getting that reinforced by the school by letting him stay in a position of power.
Until legally they can no longer allow it. So let's take a break here, and then we will shift into the power dynamic aspect that I know you, Tessa, wanted to talk about. So let's take a break here and we'll be right back. So kind of launching into that, what I kind of wanted to say about that test before I hand it over to you is, when someone presents like Fletcher, there's a reason why he's working with 18, 19, 20-year-olds. He's not working with same age peers. And I think that's by design, whether consciously or unconsciously. It's similar to how people who struggle with this in real life will usually get into relationships with people that are either much younger or people who they don't seek out relationships with their peers, if you will, someone with like the same kind of power and agency that they have. So I kind of wanted to throw it to you, Tessa, to specifically talk about this dynamic, which is instructor and student.
For sure. So it's what we've been talking about is all kind of leading up to this general overview of the instructor being the conductor, the train conductor, the driver, the person who is taking the students on the journey and helping them create their own connection to it. Where Fletcher's relationship with his students is he's this mysterious golden ticket. And if they just persevere long enough, they are going to achieve greatness through him because, and this is another unfortunate side of the entertainment industry and of certain other disciplines, is that it's not so much how you do, but who you know. Which is why that concert at the end of the movie was so important, because that's introducing young artists to established venues, right? And I think it's one of the things that really bothers me about this movie and leading into the instructor idea. And it's funny because the fight they have with the cousins, I think they are, the football boys at the D3 school. One of the guys, when Miles is like, well, I'm in the top music conservatory in the country and it's like, I'm going to be the best, blah, blah, blah. His cousin is like, isn't art subjective? Like, how does best exist? And I think that, and like, don't even get me started on sports. That's a whole other, devastation of existence. But it's this idea that this abuse is acceptable because it's creating something that we as a society has deemed as more important than the means that it took to get there. So you'll see that a lot in music and entertainment, where the conductor is allowed all sorts of bad behavior. There was this in my grad school several years after I graduated, we had found out that one of the department heads was leading a big drug ring in the university and taking advantage. Yeah, bad. Iowa, it's got a lot of meth problems. But he was also taking advantage of the underage students. And it was an underage kid's mom who got the university involved to like finally stop his transgressions, right? So what's tough about these relationships is that if there is only one person holding the power, which is Fletcher in this case, he's the judge, jury, and executioner, we lose all objectivity in art, in music, and you really can't win at all, because it's either go with Fletcher or you don't get to do it anymore. There's no like plan B for Miles.
No, and that's one of the things where people start to trade, right? Like people start to influence pedal and they start to trade because there is some truth. Money for programs or sports ball or for anything else comes from wins. And we see that same pattern emerge. We're seeing it right now in politics, but I said I wouldn't do that. But the thing that we see in this film is the undertone of the film is that because Fletcher keeps winning the competitions, because he keeps getting the first place trophies at the prestigious competitions at the top school in the nation, that he is therefore driving the school's ability to attract top talent. And then the school can be self-sustaining, even if his methods are unconventional, that they'll tolerate it because he's winning.
Yeah, until he's too big of a risk, which is when the lawsuit stuff happens. And then all of a sudden he's just not there anymore.
Right. But how long have we seen things going to the point where people like demand that these people who are winning, we saw it at Penn State with Joe Paterno, This dude was the coach for 40 years, and there was that whole abuse scandal going on. And whether he knew or didn't know, like, come on, man. Like, but people were demanding this man be put back in power at Penn State. And we see this same pattern emerge over and over again. No, this is my ticket to winning. This person, we can sacrifice our ethics. We can sacrifice the mental health and well-being of our students, including like the physical well-being, because Tessa, you're talking about it, your program's person's probably using these kids to peddle his drug ring and is definitely touching people and sexually abusing people, which last I checked causes long-term lasting damage. And it's very difficult to get over. But it's fine. We got the shiny little person on top of the shiny little thing that says we're the best. And universities and other places that get a very locked in, limited worldview start losing sight of what's really important, because that's how they get their funding, through these narrow channels, and everything else stops mattering.
I mean, I plan to talk about this more when we talk about Andrew more specifically and ambition. But what you're highlighting on is where my brain goes to, which is, I'm going to get on my little soapbox, is that kind of like capitalism perspective that like productivity and outcome rules the day and how we get there doesn't matter. And this idea that the stress, the trauma, the abuse that these kids, I'm going to call them kids, are being put through is worth it for the outcome. And I philosophically, both personally and professionally, massively disagree with that. Yeah, I think what you're touching upon, how like this kind of power dynamic takes advantage of also that mindset, and forgives a lot of this behavior and abandons the most vulnerable people involved. And he's holding their future hostage too. I think that's also what has to be discussed, like you've said, in terms of why don't these kids stand up to him? You know, it's kind of shocking that Andrew even gets to the point where he kicks the shit out of him on stage. I mean, that is he hit his breaking point, right? And he was also he just got in a car accident. Like, you know, who knows what's going on with him in that moment.
I think that was a writer's healing experience, a corrective experience for a writer, honestly.
Because I feel like in the real world, Andrew would have just passed out. Like he would have just like collapsed into unconsciousness just from physically like blood loss, if nothing else, and getting his fucking bell rung. I don't think he would have had, I mean, I guess adrenaline, but
I would have gone like that. Yeah. He probably would have been able to get to, he's that dissociated, that focused. People in accidents and things get to that. I think you're right that he would have just passed out. Yeah. Like at some point, your body's going to adrenaline dump and you're going to realize what happened to you. And the likelihood that he performs an epic tackle and starts wailing on the instructor is supremely unlikely.
But I think this kind of verges into another question we can put into the air with this discussion, which is, I'm sure there are people who watch this movie and think that this is the way that Fletcher is treating these kids is correct. That to be, no, I'm being, I'm
no.
But no, there are people who watch this and they're like, this is like, you got to kind of like beat people into submission and you got to like break their spirit. And like, there are people who watch this and they think that it is good to be this hard on people as they're developing, quote unquote. I work like as a child therapist and family therapist, I see this through the lens of parenting too. Like I've worked with parents where I'm like, you're not doing what you think you're doing by dominating and shaming your kid like this. Because if I had given myself more time, because I watched this movie right before we recorded, to be quite honest, I would have done got some statistics around like shame and parenting and stuff, because I do think there's a lot of people who think that the best way to learn is through shame, kind of going back to the humiliation we talked about in the beginning. And what I know anecdotally is that, and through Brene Brown, I guess, is that shame actually does not help us. And when shame is effective, it's more when we experience internal shame. And what I mean by that is, oh, I said something to my friend, it hurt their feelings. I feel ashamed that I did that to them. That feeling stays with me. And so I'm not going to do that again. You know, like that kind of shame is good for us in the sense that we learn from that experience and we move. The kind of shame that we see in this movie that people do think is good for you in terms of growing is when someone pushes shame upon you through making you feel like garbage, making you feel like getting in your fucking face. Like I think we do see that a lot in sports too, right? Like the kind of grab your helmet, get in your face, call you a fucking slur or whatever, like we see in this movie, use abusive language. And there are people who would probably argue with me down right now that is good. And that actually, as a society, we're getting worse because we don't shame people like we used to. Bah, bah, bah. And you know what, bro? I was going to say come find me. Don't come find me because I don't want to do it. But like, I would happily make that argument every day of the week that doesn't work. So I guess I want to put it out to you guys too, what you think in terms of people who do think in order to educate and to challenge that you should be hard on people like this. Hard on people, quote unquote.
So I saw that reaction from Tessa. I feel like it burst out of you. We need to let that have some air.
Well, first and foremost, it's just statistically untrue that strict or punitive education works. The science is out there.
Yeah, I felt confident that I didn't need it to make that statement.
Yeah, no, the science is out there. We talked about this at the beginning too. It's this idea that because these horrific things foster quote unquote greatness, they become more acceptable. And that is only just slowly changing in the industry. Like COVID, one of the silver linings was that all of this drama and tea about abuse in the entertainment industry started coming out because we didn't have to suck up to get hired anymore because no one was getting hired, you know? So we see these institutions, my undergrad too, my acting major friends, one of their biggest things was there was this group of professors who would legitimately tell you the first day, we're breaking you down so we can build you back up again. We are not cars. We're human beings with independent personal experiences. And it's the method argument, right? Like if I'm going to be an incredible actor, I need to have physically or emotionally experienced these things. But that's, to me, and there's science behind it, that's not good acting. That's re-traumatizing yourself and then saying another person's words on top of your own real emotions. When I believe our jobs as teachers is to offer the tools necessary for the student to discover in their own autonomy how they can best create. I think it's silly to think that punishing someone into making great art would ever really work.
Agreed.
I agree. It doesn't work.
And it never has. It never has. So, you know, Brittany, when you were saying to somebody who thinks that still works or that's still an argument, you're old. Yeah, that's what it is. You're fucking old, and you think that it's okay to yell and scream at someone, and you think that that's okay, and it's not, and you're wrong, and you've always been wrong.
Like I said, I think it's almost like, well, one, I think people just miss being able to do that. Like if they're really being honest, they miss being able to act out. You know, when people who miss doing that stuff or you know romanticize that, I always want to say like, what do you think you're losing by not being able to behave that way? You know, and where I can find some empathy, kind of like I was saying up top about Fletcher, is I can definitely see where it can be like a return on investment idea, which is I had to go through this abhorrent shit. I got screamed at. I got called slurs. I got humiliated, and it made me great. And so I now get to do that to somebody else, right? And that's what I've earned. And fuck you that I have to be the first generation who doesn't get that return on investment, right? Mm-hmm. And instead of recognizing like statistically, it doesn't work. It truly does not work. And where I can add on from like a therapeutic perspective is I've worked with kids and teenagers where they did some shit that was out of pocket, and there were what I would call emotional consequences to that, where people weren't super happy with them. Mm-hmm. And you can have conversations around being honest with people, basically, is what I'm saying, about where they fucked up and not saving them from that. I think people also conflate that if you're not actively humiliating, or like if you're not actively like educating or coaching in this way, that you're like you're enabling, or you're too accommodating. And they don't understand that there's a third option, which is when I'd work with kids, I'd be like, wow, I would even say sometimes like, I'm feeling really disappointed in you because you chose to do that. And we talked about that. And that wasn't cool. I had a kid once and he was like 7, and this is like a traumatic memory. So when I worked at a partial day program, and he eloped and no one noticed because we had another kid trying to jump off of a bleacher. This is kind of what that job was like. And we didn't notice.
That is absolutely what that job is like.
We didn't notice until a neighbor brought him back to the building because he walked to their house and asked to use their telephone to call his grandparents.
Oh God.
And the next day in group, I said to that kid, but kindly, but firmly, I said, I was really upset. Like I wanted to throw up. I think that's what I said. Like when I found out you had left, I want to throw up because I was so upset. And we have to sit with what happened. And honestly, you have to be age appropriate with this. He might have been a little too young, to be quite honest. This is when I was an intern, to go at him that hard. But I wasn't screaming at him. I didn't take out my upsetness on him, where I was like, how could you lay that? Like screaming at him, which is, I think, what we're talking about older generations would think would be appropriate, is you have to make him feel really bad. He didn't feel great when I said, and because I said that, and then we sat in the silence of me saying that. So he still experienced the consequence of his choice. And when I work with teenagers, they still experience the consequence of their choices. And that doesn't feel good. And like I said, that was what will create like that internal experience, which will stay with them. And hopefully they won't repeat whatever behavior we're discussing, where they're like, it didn't feel good to have that conversation with Brittany about what I did. And that can be enough, which people don't get. It's like we don't trust people enough almost to not get on their ass and like lecture and get in their face and break them down and all that stuff. I just want to highlight that there is a third way, not just that either we're like buttering everybody up and like patting their head, or we're screaming in their face and like teaching them a lesson. And I think going to what we're talking about in terms of educating and coaching and mentoring is that you are also not cultivating an individual self that feels that internal motivation as well. Because what Fletcher is also enforcing is that external motivation of, are you working that hard because you genuinely want this? Are you working that hard because you don't want me to scream in your fucking face?
Ding, ding, ding. Which one of those will extinguish as soon as the stressor is removed. And one will not. The reality of the music business and industry, just like many other things, is they're not for everyone, and they're not for everything, and not everyone will find a pathway to success. And in performing arts, I was in an acting class once after college, and somebody, a director who had done movies that no one heard of even, which are far more than we ever do. But he was like, your chance of making it is, like, holding up his fingers, like with just almost no space in between, is this big. But as a teacher, it's not your job to decide that. It's your job, like Tessa said, to give students the tools, because you don't know any better than anybody else. And this director was kind about it. He wasn't being a prick and like tooting his own horn like a lot do, like the owner of that acting school. It's a different discussion, who was kind of like this guy and absolutely would yell at you if you did breathed wrong. This type of thing exists where the world will weed people out for what they're not going to be good at, and people will find their own way to actualize in what will work for them. But the role of the teacher isn't to do that for the world. The role of the teacher is to empower the student to face the world with all that they have and find out for themselves if they can make it with what they bring, not what the teacher decides it takes to bring. Mm-hmm. Now, there does need to be a standard. And this is where this line gets tricky, is there does need to be a degree of reality check. There needs to be a degree of, look, man, you got to practice. Okay. You got to practice. You have talent, but what you're doing ain't good enough. And there will be someone else who will practice, who will not be as good as you, but will practice and learn the part, and they will get the job. And like that director said to us, like holding his fingers up, there are this many jobs. There are this many jobs. And if you don't do your work, you will not get them. You will not be in the position to get the job when it comes, that you still might not get, but you will have no chance. You will go from having little chance to no chance. But there has to be a difference between reality checking people and crushing their soul. And that's important.
And the thing is, what you're talking about, Ben, is that will shake out. And what I mean by that is, like, if you come to rehearsal and you haven't practiced and you don't got it, then you don't get to perform. You know what I mean? Like the way that he does this stuff with the competitive stuff and you're going to play until your hands bleed and we're going to play till 2 a.m. before we even get to like the actual rehearsal itself.
Right.
That stuff to me is where that is just him getting his kicks, because
yes, there's no defense of that.
If they didn't have it, then just say like, you can't be the first chair or whatever on this. You can't be the core. You know, like I said, like there isn't a reliance on natural consequences.
No.
Which is like part of that third path, right? Instead, it's more like I'm going to just berate and abuse and all that stuff.
Well, and that's where I want you to hear what I'm saying is it's the role of the teacher to hold accountability.
Yeah.
Okay. That's true. The role of the teacher is to teach the world that you're walking into. We can't let Brittany, you're a supervisor now. You can't sign off on people's paperwork that aren't doing their shit.
Yeah.
Right? Like if your note's wrong, I'm not signing it. Redo it. I'm not ever going to tell you you're a stupid fucking slur moron because you did your note wrong. I'm going to sit with you and go like, this note is wrong and this is why, and you need to do it better. If they're persistently not getting it, not doing it, et cetera, or they're losing clients because of behavior or whatever is happening, there's going to be more discussions, but it doesn't need to rise to that level. And with things like performing arts, you're dealing with people whose egos are already so fragile and they're already trying to create something out of their soul to bring forth into the world that they just want someone to tell them that was good enough. Yeah. And I'm saying that from the soul of a performer. I may not try to do that for money that's beyond the $12 the bar claims they can afford to pay the band. But I do it because I love it and I need it. And the line from Gladiator where Proximo tells Maximus, you begin to do it all for this, and they will love you for this. You may begin to love them for that. Maybe why that's my favorite movie is because it speaks to me, is that you have to understand that that is who you have as a student, and what you're trying to help them grow is their ability to seek what they need. But you can't justify crushing their soul out of them in an unrelenting, brutal business.
Yeah.
Because music is possible to do at multiple levels. No, everyone's not good enough to be a professional. They're not. Like as a guitar player, I probably toe that line. As a singer, probably not. And I'm okay with that. The thing that's true is that you can't crush out of somebody what they need for your own ego. What you have to do is cultivate and grow. And there is never a universe where it's justified to beat someone so into a pulp that they're avoiding your punishment and thinking that that is you teaching them to be better.
Agreed. I think something else that I wanted to make sure I talked about too is that when we mention the age of the kids that are in undergrad, or maybe the age of kids who go to these kinds of schools, the age of onset for mental illness is between the ages of 17 and 24. So not only are they a almost protected group of people because they are so young and their brains aren't fully developed. There's so many different reasons why. So not only are they protected because they're just young and their brains are more impressionable and they don't know who they are yet. And then also the possibility that they may experience the onset of a mental illness during this time as well just makes a recipe for disaster in this case. Again, I just don't think people understand the true vulnerability of people who are this age.
No, they don't.
Yeah.
This is an area of interest for me. When I did ROTC, I wanted to go into the adjutant corps with the Army, which is the one where they kind of preserve the sociology and psychology of soldier life. They oversee training, they oversee base life, they oversee these kinds of things, and basic training methods are part of that. And back in 2004, 2005, when I was doing this is what I really took to, was watching the change take place in the military away from the world we were in, where we all were brought up, all of us millennials were brought up by people who were brought up by World War II vets, and our parents could never live up to the glory of the stories of their parents. So they then in turn wanted their kids to be the best because they could never be the best because they could never live the Great War. And then they had Vietnam and that wasn't the same. And then they gave us participation trophies, but then got mad at us for
well, the kids weren't the ones that asked for the participation trophies. Yeah, the parents are the ones, so they can suck it.
Yes,
on that.
That's what I mean. That's exactly. Yeah. They can suck it because they're the ones that needed it, because they're the ones that had the holes in them they were trying to fill, and then they get mad at us because we want a trophy for everything that they gave to us for everything. So how are we socialized? But anyway, looking at the military was starting to change their training methods, like that idea of the breakdown before the buildup, realizing the returns on that aren't what people thought, but everybody adheres to that idea because that's what they see in tough guy movies. And they just ignore, everyone's like, oh, Arlie Ermy did such a good job in Full Metal Jacket. And yet again, with films, you missed the fucking point of the movie, okay? Yeah, Arlie Ermy did such a good job because he was a drill sergeant. Who would have thunk? But you can't fully break them down. You need to conduct stress inoculation for people that will be doing stressful things, people that will be military, people that will be first responders, people that will be performing musicians on stage. You want to find out real fucking quick that nothing is going to go, no battle plan strikes contact with the enemy, get on stage. Something's going to go wrong. You're going to unplug your guitar, your mic stand's going to fall down, and your drummer's going to put a video of that on social media. And then make little cartoon things of whoop. But stuff's going to happen. And you're going to have to learn to get used to that. And you're going to have to get used to getting thick skin because people are going to have opinions about your work and critics and everything. And there's some reality to that. That is, I think teachers, you need to provide to students that they can prepare themselves for it, that like, look, this is what you're going to face. And you need to be able to help them understand that that's going to happen. Military, like people are going to be shooting at you, trying to kill you. Whatever world you thought you were walking into where you get an extra life from a video game ain't real. One bullet can kill you. And you need to get people to be able to function under that environment so that they survive. Musicians are going to need to be able to perform in small auditoriums where every mistake is audible, and they aren't going to be able to get in their head, and they're going to have to get used to that director going like, get back in time. However, that doesn't mean it gets to come with someone slapping you in the face.
Yeah.
And so, Tessa, have you ever felt compelled to slap a student directly in the face?
No.
So disgusting.
No. I've been compelled to drink after a hard rehearsal, but
like you brought up a great idea, Hannah, about brain development. Because right now, I mean, I teach all ages. I have adult students. I have freshmen in high school. And I think that's something that's obvious in the film too, is that Fletcher is expecting such an impossible level of professionalism or skill that just isn't attainable at a certain point, just straight up physiologically, scientifically. Like,
absolutely,
I have to have kind of the same lesson every couple of days with some of my students, because it's not their fault they don't get it. It's a weird concept. And I really think, and this is something that I'm so passionate about, and one of the sayings I hate the most is you can't see the art for the artist. And I think that is absolutely the opposite of what art is. You've got to know the artist to see how the art was created. And in my philosophy, like, yes, this art could be created as a result of horrific abuse, and subjectively we can get a lot of things out of it. But because art is subjective, and because all people have the propensity and the ability to be creative, honoring abuse takes potential away from non-abusive artists to grow as well. You know, I don't need to listen to Kanye. I don't enjoy the way that he works around mental health issues, the way that he treats the people that he works with. I can say that, yeah, his music is great. I can understand when people compare him to a modern day Mozart in a certain sense, but having great music does not take away from being a person I don't vibe with. You know, so we spend so much time glorifying these abusers because we have been told as a society that's what great music is, when I think it would be cool if we lived in a society where we honor people for who they are and what they create.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I don't think genius, quote unquote, is worth this kind of torturous, abusive behavior. And you're right in that we forgive a lot because someone is or is not a genius. And I think what's pointed, and I'm sure this was meant, they did this on purpose with the writing of this movie, is he says at the end, Fletcher, I have not created a Charlie Parker. So he can acknowledge that his tactics are not even creating the genius, the art that he is justifying his behavior around. If I had to hear that motherfucker repeat that Charlie Parker symbol story one more time, it's just such a classic case of someone justifying or like retrofitting their abuse to rationalize it, right? And it kind of goes back to sort of the general idea of this topic, which is this really worthwhile to create this outcome? Or are people who are more prone to this behavior find this industry or find these kinds of industries to justify, rationalize, act out, even be rewarded for abusive tendencies that they might have always exhibited? But they get to find this perfect place where they can exploit it. They can exploit it on people who are in disempowered positions, disempowered ages. And then they can, write a love story about it in terms of, isn't that great? Wasn't it great that Charlie Parker got almost hit with the symbol because it made him who he is? He might have always been who he was. I would also argue, I like that there's the argument that Andrew makes, as much as this behavior, quote unquote, might create greatness, it also probably stifles and prevents greatness.
Yeah.
Just because you're naturally talented does not mean you're naturally ambitious enough to overcome these situations that you're being put in. And also that reframe like Fletcher puts around people being discouraged, so they must not have it. Some people have it. They just are discouraged as well. Those two things aren't exclusive. You can have it and it could have been ruined for you by someone like Fletcher. And so the gymnastics you get to watch Fletcher do to justify and recontextualize how his behavior might have, for every one gifted musician he lifted up, there might have been 100 that he destroyed.
Mm-hmm.
That is a reality. That is a thought that Fletcher will never be able to hold.
And I think it's such an interesting concept because I think adds a little bit of laziness to the industry too. Like, I'm just going to born identity through trauma and you're going to be the world's greatest drummer. That's just not the reality of how that, at least it's so far from my experience. You can't bully someone into being perfect because perfection doesn't exist. And that's something that I use a lot in my studio. I don't know if I use this on you, Ben, but it's this idea that practice doesn't make perfect, it makes permanent. However you're approaching your practice, that is what's going to be solidified, which is also why I go back to Andrew needed to have a private teacher because he could be making his hands bloody and punching drum kits all day, but do we know if that's actually helping his skills or is he just practicing incorrect rhythms, So I just think it's lazy creativity to think that because abuse and trauma feed into and I guess ignite our emotions, that those are like healthful or good options to use.
So on that note, I think we should take a break there and we will come back to talk about Andrew and ambition. All right.
So I wanted to pick up there on the ambition thing since we're starting there, because I think Tessa's point is important. And you did definitely use that. I'd forgotten it till you just said it. So I'll tell you what I think about you every day and I'll tell you why later. But my clients all know about you too for breathing.
Yes.
So your messages have transcended, but I'll talk about that more in final thoughts. The importance of recognizing that ambition alone and determination and focus, like we see Andrew go through where he's like torturing himself.
Yeah.
Tessa's point is vitally important. And with music, you can practice till permanence a absolutely incorrect technique. And then because it's so ingrained, if you are not aware and have not had someone kind enough to help you understand what you are doing wrong in a way that is safe enough for you to be within your window of tolerance that you can learn, instead of so overactivated that you just fawn as part of your fight or flight, fawn or freeze system to do whatever the person who is yelling at you and making you feel bad about yourself is saying, but really learn it and digest it, which is part of why I can use my diaphragm now. So we have learned that. But understanding that people can't learn when they're in survival mode. You cannot thrive and survive at the same time. And what we see with Andrew's ambition in this movie is that he is pushing himself far beyond his reasonable human limits to a point that he's injuring himself.
Yeah, I even kind of wrote in my notes, like, could you classify this as self-harm?
Yes.
The bleeding, the punching, the not stopping when it hurts. My assumption is I never played the drums, but you probably go through a period where you have to develop calluses.
Yes.
And that will cause bleeding in that process, but to like continuously be in this position where it is hurting you.
Yeah, I mean, his at-home drum kit, the one that he uses to practice on or whatever, is stained with blood. Like they show that they pull away at some point when he's in that process, and you can see like everything has a little bit of blood on it. And it's like, this is too much. This is too far. I think about, what about him eating? What about him going outside? Is he drinking any water? Because he's sweating a lot in this movie. Is there like just like, again, like going back to that idea of blind ambition and how it can lead you to not take very good care of yourself because you think that's what makes that I'm a real musician or whatever. Right.
Yeah. The idea that you have to be suffering in some capacity to be great, I wholly disagree with. And when I do this work with clients, it's almost always male clients, male presenting clients, and who get kind of caught up in sort of how this kind of ambition also gets entangled with capitalism, hustle culture, toxic masculinity, all that kind of stuff. And how there is much more of a pressure, it seems to be. I can only speak as a woman observing, but the pressure of, as a man, it seems to be that like you can only get praise, be seen, be loved, be cared for if you've achieved something that someone can touch or see or taste or hold. And what I really want to make sure we talked about, Andrew, is you can see that dinner with his family told me everything I need to know in terms of why he's doing this to himself.
Mm-hmm.
He's a kid where his mom has left. So that can't be understated in terms of how he feels about himself and his value and his self-worth. And then he has a dad that seems like he's trying to be supportive and can kind of do it, but kind of not. That dinner table scene, you see Andrew try to share his positive news at first, and no one hears him, right? And then as soon as he shares again, which I was proud of him for getting the gumption to like share again his positive news, because in a lot of people, they would just not say anything. It's immediately challenged, diminished, minimized, almost made fun of by his cousin. Everyone is redirecting the praise to his other cousin who is in sports. And this is when I say like his dad does a lot of things right, but also a lot of things wrong. And I hated that his dad, Mr. Paul Reiser, did not assert himself in that moment. And kind of skirt where the conversation was going. Hey, that's great. Where I can give Paul Reiser the benefit of the doubt, his dad, is if the dad is nervous, maybe to encourage this part of Andrew's life because he's seeing the not so great behaviors Andrew's doing. Maybe to achieve it, maybe he's already seeing like the isolation and the self-harming behaviors and all that harmful qualities. And maybe that's why he doesn't want to pump it up too much. But outside of that, you see right away that Andrew's doing all this because he wants to be noticed. He wants to be praised. He wants to be valued. He wants to be taken seriously. And his family does not do that. So within one dinner scene, the director did a really great job of giving me all I needed to know in terms of why Andrew is doing this to himself. How I think about this in my own language, and Ben, you used it earlier, is when someone has like a hole inside of them. Sometimes people call it like the wound, the mother wound or the father wound or whatever.
Ooh, these are terms I'm not familiar with, but hole, yes.
Yes. And trying to fill that up with something external, right? And when I work with people on their sense of self, like people who struggle with perfectionism, stuff like that, which Andrew definitely does, we have to have a conversation around like filling yourself up from the inside out and not from the outside in. And Andrew is someone, and it's very age appropriate too. So I don't want to hate on him because it's very age appropriate.
Oh, it's 19-year-old male to a T.
Who's been deserted by one of his parents, you know? Yeah. And so of course it's outside
and not validated
in.
For what he's better that most people alive have ever been at.
Yeah. So it makes sense why he acts out. It makes sense why he acts out against his cousins, why he acts out ish towards his dad. It all lines up as of why Andrew is doing what he's doing. And like I said, how it pulls into like my real life experiences is what I kind of ask clients who come in because they're not having a good time, even if they still feel connected to this higher goal, is how are you feeling day to day? Like, how is your quality of life? And does that still feel worth this bigger goal you have for yourself? And if you really want to tell me to my face that it is, keep on keeping on. You get to define what the quality of your life is and what that feels like to you. And when I work with people, obviously they're going to therapy. And so like I have that card to play where I'm like, then why are you here? Why you can't do both of these things at once, which is keep on this path to this, the way you're doing it, to this highly ambitious goal and feeling so connected to that. And at the same time, be coming into my office and being like, why do I feel so bad? in those situations, they usually want me to tell them to fix them. And what they mean by that is make it so that this doesn't bother me so much. And then I can keep doing what I'm already doing without acknowledging it's not working.
Make it better. Make me better so that I can get past the barriers that aren't making me good enough. That's my favorite.
Make me so I don't have anxiety, or so I'm sleeping better. How do I not care almost?
Yeah, that's what I hear. How do I heal from this as fast as possible?
It's still through that very app.
So that I can keep doing the same shit, but better.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's trying to put therapy through that same productivity like hustle
lens.
Culture, external validation perspective, which I have to break down for people. And I just have to say, like, we just have to acknowledge the reality situation, which is you can't put therapy through the same filter as these other things. And also, babe, you feel like shit. You feel like shit. You look like shit. Let's be real.
Yeah, absolutely. Something else I noticed in that scene where with the family and the eating was that his dad actually then gives a dig at him at the end to kind of reprimand him, I think, for saying something shitty about the football. When he says, "Have you heard back from Lincoln Center yet?" Ugh. And I'm just like, that is unhelpful in this moment. And if you want to put your son in his place, you should be doing that face to face, not out in front of everybody. That's not okay.
And there's so much in there to address and so many things. Brittany, I mean, so many things are true, right? I think the uncle was taking that dig only after he started being a dick. But the rest of it it's so on point that for male presenting folks, people identify as male and how we're socialized by the world, speaking as one who's about as cis male as it gets and able to acknowledge that is not the only experience nor the correct one. It's just a one that exists, right? But the way that it's socialized from the time you're a little kid is cry on the playground and it's over for you. And that starts shutting you down from a whole healthy range of experiences. Like, I was sad. That made me feel bad. I should probably learn from that and either do better or don't do it. But all they learn instead, socialized, is you should be better than you are. And that can manifest into this like completely toxic idea that if you just do everything at the highest level possible, the level that everybody's talking about, like Charlie Rich does, this drummer, right? Then you will be seen for the glory of a man that you are.
Or you'll be loved. Like Andrew
you'll be loved. Yes.
Wants to be loved by his family. Well, he wants to be loved in general.
Yes.
And he's confusing, understandably so, this achievement-based love with internal love that comes from ideally your parents and then becomes you to yourself.
Yes, and that's what I'm saying is it's that's how we're socialized.
Yeah.
Is to believe that these great men that played sports ball better than you ever could, or were these great soldiers or musicians or whatever, and that everybody's still talking about, even if it's 60 years later. Like, speaking is like my instrument of choice, guitar, right? If I hear one more new fucking guitarist talk to me about Jimi Hendrix, who's like listened to one song by Jimi Hendrix, I'm gonna scream. Or one more fucking guitar magazine, right? That Jimi Hendrix was the greatest guitarist of all time. Not to take away from the accomplishments or the innovation of the man's brilliance, but he died at 27. There are guys in basements that are better than Jimi Hendrix ever was. And again, not to take away his social relevance, his skill, the things that he did, but there have been more things that have happened since the 70s. And if we just continue to build these people's legends We confuse, especially how we socialize young men. We just lost one of these people that would be equivalent to Jimi Hendrix and Dick Butkus as a linebacker who was so good at what he did, but we don't talk about what the man did to his body to do it. And we don't talk about what he did to his brain, and just people keep talking about like, well, nobody can ever be as good as Butkus. Nobody can ever be as good as Hendrix. Nobody can ever be as good as an actor as Jimmy Stewart or as good a singer as Ma Rainey. It teaches people that like in order to become somebody worthy of love who is not getting that at home, like Andrew, that his ambition replaces falsely, like you're saying, Brittany, this idea that you can become loved for all time. And he flat says that I want to be one of the greats, not great. I want to be one of the greats, and breaks up with that girl that is
the only thing that he has going on that is outside of this world that is healthy.
Right.
Lasts for 5 seconds.
And age appropriate.
Yeah.
And age appropriate. But people replace this idea that you can, if you become one of those things, you'll be loved. And we miss out on things like the dad hits on it. The story of Charlie Parker sticks in my head because of the history of jazz and rock class I took in undergrad. Charlie Parker got horribly addicted to opioids and heroin and died at 34. And he was in such bad shape, the coroner thought he was 60. And was a brilliant musician, but he got into a car accident, broke his spine, and got addicted to pain pills, which is a story those of us that have been around in this current opioid pandemic can be all too familiar with. But people don't talk about the cost of becoming that, and then realize that these people die alone in pools of their own vomit or some other horrible way, too young, and then think that because people still speak their name because they were taught to speak a name, like Tessa was alleging to, right? You're taught to speak these people's names. I was taught in a class to speak this man's name with respect on it because of what he accomplished as a musician. But we don't acknowledge in these way men are socialized, especially of who was this person? Who were they able to be? Did they achieve their life goals and dreams? None of that matters because you'll be loved by everybody forever and they'll speak your name. But you won't be around to feel it or see it or hear it. And that hole inside of you will never be filled. In fact, it will get deeper.
Well, it'll fuck you up because if you get it, there's a lot of stories we know now of like actors and people like that where they get the thing, whatever the thing is, and they still feel empty. And that's his own existential fuck up, where then you're like, oh shit, that actually didn't fix me. I thought it would. And now I have to really reckon with what is actually going on inside of me that's not clicking.
Right.
And that is horrible because it's suffering, right? And also, I can't imagine the mind fuck of like the things like in the story, what you put yourself through and rationalize to get to that point. You get to that point, you get the surface level reward, but yet you don't feel any different. And I can't imagine what people have to go through to reckon with that. I'm sure a lot of times they don't, which is why there are a lot of successful people who still die by suicide, who still get addicted to drugs, who have everything going for them. I think it's why, like, for instance, when Anthony Bourdain died, and I think why it puzzles people like him and Kate Spade, because that happened around the same time by the same method, is like, why would they kill themselves? They had everything, quote unquote, right? And I really like to, when I work with clients, really break down and honestly destroy this idea that if I reach the top of this mountain, whatever this mountain is, that I will feel perfect, that I will feel happy, that I will have no problems. And it's so toxic, so simplistic. And I get it for that reason. I think it says something about how stubborn we can be internally to the truth is we have all this evidence that fame doesn't cure you, if you want to think of it like that. And yet still people will wholeheartedly believe this, like this idea of legacy. Like, you're right, Ben, you'll be dead. You know, if heaven's real, maybe you can feel it in heaven. But like, if it isn't, if there is no afterlife, right, then you won't know. Who cares?
Right. What if you're worm food?
The life is the life you're living now.
today isn't a Charlie Parker history day, but, look up the liberties taken with his story, and like that symbol is thrown at his feet. But the point stands, right? That like, had he never become that and he got to live his life, would he have been okay?
Yeah.
Would he have been, had I not had to die like that of like pneumonia and like drug addiction, had like horrible tragedies, might I have traded that? And we see that over and over, like, and we don't even grant people the adoration they deserve while they're alive.
Mm-hmm.
When did Heath Ledger win his Oscar? Talk about method acting, like the man like adopted method acting to become so many things, and then probably never filled that hole inside himself.
Mm-hmm.
And when did he get his Oscar?
Posthumously.
When he was dead.
Mm-hmm.
When he was dead.
I mean, Van Gogh's another classic story, right? There's all these stories of people who they couldn't reach that hilltop or whatever, and it doesn't matter. So is there anything else that I know I've been talking a lot, but is there anything anyone else wants to add to about Andrew or ambition?
I think just in general, and I'm trying to think of like any career in my brain where you reach like one point and then that's it. Like, that's the rest of your life. That's who you are. Nothing ever changes. That doesn't exist. And like, yes, in the industry, we have what's called the Star is Born moment. Like, you get introduced to a crazy casting director, or you get a small feature in this film, which leads to like 15 more projects down the line, which that is how things happen at certain points. But to think about art in the sense of like, this project or this performance is really, I think, the antithesis of like what creation is. And this is why I think it's hard to be a teacher sometimes and hard to be a performer as well, because obviously we want every audition, every performance to be as good as we can do it. And so we think that we have to punish ourselves into performing at our best, when in reality, if we were just practicing a little bit more patiently and a little bit more health focused, we wouldn't have that anxiety or that desire to force ourselves into performance, because all the tools you need, you already have. And I think as a society, we really need to look at how good is this art we're allowing to be made. Anyway, objectively, like if someone has to die, if someone has to be traumatized in order for this to be created, is it really worth the creation?
Yeah. I talk with clients about who are creatives when they're feeling better, and how they'll have panic, sort of anxiety that they can't create the same art because they're not as sad or depressed or as anxious as they used to be. And so I talk a lot with clients, ironically, weirdly enough, about, or serendipitously, this conversation about like how we don't give enough space for joy as a motivator and beauty and contentment. And so sometimes I will give those clients homework to create, which is maybe sounds like homework about creating, but to like write me a poem about feeling good. Or write me a poem about just day-to-day life. Make something creative that is based in positivity. And let's get away from this toxic narrative that depression's good for you because it makes you a better writer or a better musician. That also feels like a way of people like retrofit their reality to fit, to make it more meaningful.
I think it's this romanticization, or however you say that word, it romanticizes the act. And I think it takes agency away from artists, because it's like, oh, I'm not as depressed these days, so my art just can't be as good. And it's like, no, dude, it's art. It's imagination. We use our perspectives and we use our truths to inform the art, but like at the end of the day, we're creating. This is imaginative. You can make anything. It doesn't have to just be your trauma or your like heart going to the bone every time you try to create. You're just gonna exhaust and numb yourself.
Yeah, Robert Pattinson has a funny quote where where he says, method acting only works when someone's playing an asshole.
Yeah.
I never hear anybody method acting being a nice guy.
Yeah.
And I'm like, what a good observation.
That's so true.
Robert. He doesn't method act. But we'll take another break here and we'll come right back for treatment. So what are we going to do with these people? Hannah, I'm going to throw to you first.
Okay.
Who would you pick out of this movie to treat?
I was thinking that motherfucker would drop dead before he went to therapy.
That's true.
Yeah. He's not walking into anybody's fucking office. He thinks he's great.
He's Hannah. You didn't even use your catchphrase. What is he?
A piece of shit.
Oh, well, damn. Yes, but he's fine.
Oh yeah. He's fine. He's whatever. He's fucking fine. But anyway, I was thinking about working with the dad, whose name I don't know if we ever find out, but it's Paul Reiser. I'm just going to say it's Paul. Dad, because I think something that Andrew is going to need is he is going to need somebody who can be more flexible than his father currently can be. And I think his dad also needs some help having a better sense of what can happen when somebody doesn't feel loved. Or when somebody has an experience of their parent leaving when they're very, very young and never comes back. I would also want to talk to him about how much do they talk about that? Is that something that happened when he was a little boy and it's never been spoken of as like him as old as he is now? Is it something that, or is it something that they ignore? And in some ways it feels more like it's something they ignore.
Yeah.
And so I think a big part of helping Andrew get to where he needs to be is really helping the dad be able to be a little bit more understanding of where Andrew is coming from. I think something that we really witness in the film is the dad really not quite getting it and not quite understanding that, yes, the way that Andrew is engaging in this and is being treated in this is not good, right? It's not okay. And he can only see that it's not good and can't see why Andrew is so driven to do this thing. Like he really seems to miss that point. And maybe that's a part of being a parent. And maybe he's just missing it because he's so worried about his son. And that could be a part of it too. But I think something that I would really want to do with his dad is really help him put himself in Andrew's shoes to help him understand the drive and why his son is so obsessed with being the best that there ever was and helping him get on that page. And I think some of those conversations there'd be some about attachment. There'd be some stuff about flexibility as a parent. There would be stuff in there about how do we talk about something that's hard with our kid who's already had a terrible thing happen to him, right? So I feel like I could really help with some psychoeducation also with that, to help him also understand some of those pieces as well, as like Andrew's self-harm, Andrew's, what I would say, disconnection from life. He seems a little bit dissociative throughout the movie to me.
Oh God.
And yeah, like helping his dad have really being able to stand in Andrew's shoes. And I think that would be really helpful because clearly Andrew needs support and help and therapy himself. But I think a big part of Andrew being able to get there is having somebody who he can really trust, who understands him.
So I'm going to piggyback on your treatment, Hannah, and think about doing therapy with Andrew and his dad together. I think Andrew definitely needs his individual therapy. And why I think therapy with his dad would be so beneficial is one, for the reasons you're bringing up. Dad even maybe bringing those things to family therapy. And then my job can be to help dad in the moment communicate what he's learning to Andrew and also practice adapting that information. and how he's engaging with Andrew. Because, yeah, you're right. He does seem like a dad that is genuinely caring and obviously supportive of his son, but doesn't get it. Like him, like such a classic parent who's emotionally removed is like getting him housing and stocking up his cupboard with Gushers. That's such a classic, like, I can't talk about how much I worry and love you, but I will give you like a year's supply of candy. Or I'll give you food. And like setting up the lawsuit thing, I think I really love that his dad isn't feeding into the dynamic that we're seeing with Andrew and Fletcher.
Yeah.
And because I think that would be easy. His dad seems to be someone who tried to be a writer and couldn't. And so now he teaches school. So I think that there's a really easy way for that to become the story, where dad is like living through Andrew and pushing him because of his story. And I think that could be something to bring into family therapy.
I guarantee you Andrew uses that against him.
Well, I think that, and I think we'd have to just have it out in family therapy about that, where dad maybe tells the story of his artistic ambition and how it didn't work out. Right. And just have it out process about Andrew's story of how that impacts his relationship with his mom and how his mom stayed or left. And I think there needs to be they need to talk about that if we can get there. You know what I mean? That story, help them find common ground with each other about that they both were hurt and acknowledge that, and like helping the dad understand also where Andrew's coming from. And so part of that job would be me helping Andrew articulate in less combative ways or passive aggressive ways or passive ways. This is why I care about this. This is why it's important. So I'd probably do like couples dialogue kind of stuff where I make them both just sit and repeat what they're hearing the other one say without editorializing or defending. And I think a lot of the work in the beginning would be just processing them both kind of saying their experience and me holding the space for them to process together and coach them as they talk to each other about how to have better communication. Because the dad is trying. Like, I almost burst into tears when at the end scene when Andrew comes off the stage after he's been humiliated, and I'm going to cry talking about it right now. And the first thing his dad does is hug him, no discussion. Like, couldn't have been a better response. Yeah, just like cover him with love.
Yeah,
you can't fix that.
I am tearing up, guys.
That's okay.
It's also almost midnight, so anyway. But I'm vulnerable, and so I think that's such a great response that he had. It wasn't like humiliating him or like being like, "What's wrong with you?" It was just like, "I don't care, let's go." And so I know the dad's got the goods, which is why I want to work with them both. But I think they just need a safe space, not to be corny, to talk about their history and talk about why they can't seem to connect now. Are there points of connection they're trying to make to each other currently that they're missing? Like when his dad says he doesn't make eye contact, what's his function with doing that, telling Andrew that? Yeah. Is it because he wants to help him, but Andrew only hears it as criticism? So you have to break down all those like barriers that are getting in the way of hearing what the other one's actually trying to say. And Andrew, like you said, probably has a whole narrative about his dad and why his dad says this. Because if Andrew's seeing everything from a critical lens, then he can't hear his dad's feedback in a neutral to helpful way. So part of my job would be with that repeating thing I was talking about, like where you repeat what the other one says verbatim, is to clock where Andrew is inserting a critical narrative. Well, you're saying that I can't make any friends. And I'm like, no. What he said was that he's worried that you broke up with your girlfriend. You know what I mean? Like, and so I think they need to do that work of uncovering where they're putting meaning on conversations that isn't actually there. So that's the work I would like to do. I can so Tessa or Ben?
Sure. Tessa, do you want to go first as how you might teach this person in these individual lessons? Or
sure. So everyone needs therapy. Everyone needs therapy. Fletcher needs to be fired. That whole conservatory needs to be under investigation, because even in the scene with Fletcher and the other music conductor, it's pretty obvious to see that this is just the fox in the hen house.
The way he storms into that room and basically bosses the whole room.
Absolutely.
And the conductor just steps aside.
Doesn't even say
and doesn't
anything.
even look at anybody in the room. He steps aside. He looks away.
Yeah. And everyone's complicit. Everyone's complicit to the abuse. I would just say there needs to be more separation between the individual students and the people with the power, aka the conductor, especially in a conservatory environment. Andrew needs to be with a private drum teacher outside of the school or within the school, but completely detached from the performance aspect of it all. Definitely needs to be in therapy. And he just needs some not music friends and not music experiences, because when it becomes your whole life, one, how can you tell you're actually getting any better? And two, how do you keep the joy and love in it?
Yeah.
I will say I cried a lot about the dad too. We're big dad fans in this house, and just seeing him, even from his place of little understanding, constantly fighting for his kid was really, really, really inspiring to see. Fletcher needs to be in jail.
That's what I was going to say.
And I will say one of the first things I noticed is that there were no femme presenting individuals in his rehearsal room. I think the first femme musician we see is the very last performance. His I got kicked out of university band.
There is that one person when he barges into that room, because I wrote this down, where he says, "Oh, I see your first chair. Let's see if it's because you're so cute."
Yep.
So he immediately discounts them and makes a sexist remark, as if, I don't even know if you're good. Maybe you're just attractive.
Maybe it's just because you're cute. Yeah.
Fuck you, dude.
And then we don't see another female musician the entire movie.
No, we do not. This movie does not pass the Bechdel test.
But yeah, have a private teacher who's not a psycho and who can actually help you objectively and make friends and go to therapy.
All right.
Love it. And for anybody looking for a music teacher, Tessa is not a psycho. I will attest firsthand. So I'll go here. I will not speak at length, which if my wife is listening, I'm looking over my shoulder here, because she'll look at me with the eyes of like, But the thing I want to think here is, if I would get a client like Andrew, which I likely would, because dealing with people's traumas and the worst things that have happened to them is where I want to be, and the kind of work that I want to do, and the work that I've spent a lot of time learning how to do. And where someone like Andrew is going to need a lot of help is through a relational approach first, before we even start getting into the deep stuff, before we start name dropping techniques. We're going to need to build a relationship, and going to need to be able to connect. And I think for someone like Andrew, that's where I'm going to start, helping him connect to the joy of why he's playing music. And if that's even something he wants, really, after going through all of this, helping him figure out who he's going to be. I'm going to assume that I'm going to get him after this big explosion, where he's gone through and had this huge kick-ass drum solo and is now dealing with the post fallout of trying to apply to new schools and get into another conservatory, and likely running into another person just like this, and helping him create a pathway to success for himself that acknowledges the post-traumatic growth that would have happened spontaneously in that moment, where he decided to, instead of crumble and fall into the trap that Fletcher set for him, that he stepped out and stepped into himself and said, "Fuck you, sir. I'm going to play this solo so fucking loud, and I'm going to play it so long, and I'm going to make this about me and my skill, and every bit of things that you tried to drill into me, I'm going to actualize all of them now. I always had it anyway." But where do we need to build that from him so that he can take that as a moment of growth and a moment of actualization, that he steps into his own shoes, and that he continues to listen to those Charlie Rich albums and any other jazz drummer and drummers throughout history that have inspired him, but he does it from a place of joy and inspiration instead of mimicry.
Mm-hmm.
Because figuring out who he's going to build himself into is the therapeutic work that needs to be done with this person, let alone the wound healing. But he needs to have a why so that he can go through the how. And the how will be very hard.
Mm-hmm.
But he won't do any of it without a why.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Very succinct, Ben. I'm proud of you, buddy. All right. We will take one final break here and then come back for final thoughts. I'll go first. Here's what I'll say is I think I get why people like this movie. I think it's a good movie in that it's well crafted. The director is great. He also wrote it. You know, I know he's gone on to do many other things like La La Land and Babylon. I will never watch this movie again. I thought it was really hard to watch. It bummed me out. It made me sad. Kind of similar to Moonlight in that I don't need to watch someone just like suffering. Mm-hmm. No reprieve for 2 hours. I hate the ending. I was getting nervous the whole time I was watching it about where this movie was going in terms of what it's saying about art and torturing yourself for art. I hate that it ends on this note where he gets this nod of approval and then he smiles and then it cuts to black. I hate that so much. I think I texted Hannah and Ben as I was watching it and said, if this movie doesn't end with this guy dying a slow and torturous death, I'm not going to be satisfied with it. Because I hate that this movie allows the possibility of like perpetuating that narrative with that ending, as if it was all worth it because you got a little nod from that asshole. Very toxic. Makes me nervous for people who watch it and interpret it that way. Anywho.
Like people who still don't get Fight Club. Yep.
Yep. So I will never watch this movie again, but not because I think it's a bad movie, just because it's a movie that doesn't bring me joy, as we've just been talking about. And so I don't think I ever need to revisit it. And I knew I'd feel this way. I've been avoiding this movie since 2014 for a reason, because I knew I would feel this way when I watched it, and I was right. So though I can respect it as a movie, I don't ever feel the need to revisit it. And that's how I feel about that.
I'll go next. I would just like to say that I don't want Damien, what is his last name? Chazelle, to write another fucking movie where we see white people talking about jazz. This motherfucker needs to take his shit and go home. Number one. Number two, I'm never going to watch this movie again. There's no reason to. It was already imprinted on my brain the first time I watched it. So watching it this time for the recording was brutal.
It's brutal.
It sucks. I don't know how else to say it. Maybe it's a good movie, like in terms of like the way it's directed and blah, blah, blah. It's acted pretty well. I think Miles does a good job of being dissociative and being disconnected. And we see everything on his face. And I think that's a big part of the film. But I'm never going to watch it again. And I hope that no one who wants to be a musician watches it, because I don't think it gives you any indication of anything good. I also don't like the ending. A part of me really felt like Andrew was going to prove to himself that he could do it. And that's why he walked back up on that stage. But my hope was that he was doing it for himself and that he wasn't doing it just to get the nod. That's what I was hoping was what the ending could be, which I think they could have demonstrated better.
All right.
Fair enough. Tess, you want to go? You want me to go?
I can go. I also, at the very end, I thought, I wish the cinematography had been more clear, because I think if you're very optimistic, you can see that final scene as Andrew like coming into his own and telling Fletcher to fuck off. Like, this is my band now, which as a musician is such a funny concept to like go onto a stage and be like, I'll cue you. I'll tell you when to come in. I'm in charge now. Hilarious anarchy. It is really hard to watch. It is really hard to watch because there is so much truth in it. I would say I'm not going to try to watch it again unless I can talk through the whole thing. That's my rule. I have to be able to talk through it. I think it's an important film because J.K. Simmons earned that Oscar, baby. He earned that. But also, I hope in a way it can help people identify that these behaviors are not acceptable. Because when you watch that first rehearsal and he's getting slapped in the face and he's getting drilled on music questions like that, and not the slapping in the face part, but like the drill, the being put on the spot, the uncomfortable nature of ensemble work is true. And I hope that if people can view this film and get good things out of it or reflective things out of it, it's these type of behaviors aren't acceptable, and we need to, as a society, adjust the way we view art and the journey through which we create it, because not everything can be justified. And everyone should go to therapy. Everyone on this earth should be in therapy, and like music lessons if you're interested, but definitely therapy is a must.
All right.
Well said. Yeah, the movie, I picked it and I subjected you all to it because of the truth.
You did.
In it. I did. And I did so knowing it's hard because it's true. And because it's a depiction of watching what so many people go through as they try to live their dreams, where some person just like this stands in their way and crushes their joy out of their soul, which results in them coming to see us.
Yeah.
And maybe they give someone like Tessa a chance to have a corrective experience with someone who'll be kind to them with what's happened when someone else tried to crush their goal, which is why she's saying the importance of being with an individual teacher who may have an impromptu therapy session with you that can walk you through, like, okay, what are we going to work through? Oh, today we were working through where you are still holding in your body, or someone made you feel so bad about yourself that you can't breathe. And when you see that on film depicted so excellently, it makes films like this important, even though they're tragic. They're very hard to watch. And whether it's through, like, music is just a particular evil. It's elusive. It's impossible. You are brought up, like I was talking about, kind of alluding to with Jimi Hendrix and other people, even Charlie Parker, like, you're brought up idolizing these people who created things out of talent, out of trauma, out of a unique way of seeing the world, out of a unique way of being themselves. And quite often, by the time we're talking about their greatest records and hits, some of those things were created in dissociative mindsets that aren't replicable sober, but people demand that as a high level of achievement that's unattainable. So now you have to do it perfectly every time and do it in a way that someone did by accident in a dissociative altered mindset, using a combination of factors that are unattainable. And that becomes a standard. And I think this movie captured all of that well. And I agree wholeheartedly that I said it, so I indicated I am one of those people who views it a little optimistically as the fuck you to him is taking, like, spotlights on me now, motherfucker. So you have to acknowledge it, because now what you're doing for the applause and your own thing, I just took away from you. That is definitely a banned person's fantasy of, like, fuck this director, this show's about us. Maybe true, maybe not, but they didn't hit it hard enough in the cinematography, as evidenced by, we got 3 people here who saw it a little differently than I did, and that's okay. It's important. That's why we discuss it, right? Art is subjective. We all see different stuff. I saw it that way, but obviously not everybody did. The importance and power of this film is it shows us we need to listen more to people's experiences, because there are terrors like this that exist everywhere, that are empowered, that take things away from people, and we need to listen.
And I will say, Ben, I'm glad we talked about this movie, because I hope that people who listen to this episode, who maybe have more of the perspective that this is okay, the way that he behaved, and that this is how you rite of passage kind of shit. I hope that people I'm glad we did it. So I hope people listen and hear us challenge all of that stuff. So I am glad we did it, even though I will never watch this movie again. Anyway.
The one thing that I wanted to say is I know there are people that see me that listen to this, and want you all to know who to thank, because Tessa, I told you to tell you that I think about you every day. There was quite a while when I was working with Tessa where beyond Tessa being like an ungodly kind teacher and very patient and willing to work with me in a genre that I know is not hers, and helped me very much. But the thing that I could not do was get my body to breathe. I just could not fucking do it. And I'm hoping that one of those times you had to go drink wasn't because I wouldn't fucking breathe.
No.
Might be.
No.
But I try not to be a pain in the ass, but my body would not cooperate. But I did learn, and I got it, and it really helped me eventually. Figured it out, and your patience was incredible for that. But now I sit in therapy with people every time, and learning to diaphragmatically breathe and create space in their body to breathe is paramount to healing from trauma. And without your lessons on that, I wouldn't be able to teach people the same way. So thank you.
Oh my God, I'm crying.
Well, on that note, Tessa, where can people find you?
Great question. So I teach adults, both industry and not, privately, 7 days a week, depending. You can find me on my Instagram, Tessa Marie Hoffman. I have a website, tessamariehoffman.net, but find me on Instagram. That's the easiest. And you can send me a direct message and we can get an email going. You can also email me at tessa.marie.hoffman@gmail.com or vocalvolition.com.
All right. And we will put all that information in the description of this episode. And as always, you can find us at Popcorn Psychology on Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok. You can find us at popcorn_psych at Twitter/X. You can always email us at popcornpsychology@gmail.com. And if you would like to support us, which we always appreciate, you can find us on Patreon. The link is in our Instagram bio where you can support us. If you are a $50 or more patron, you can even pick the topic of an episode. And if you would like to get merch, you can find us on tpublic.com. All right, everybody, go find some joy. Go find some joy, everybody.